All right. It's my pleasure to introduce Diana Leza Sheehan. Diana has over 20 years in the consumer insights industry, working across sales, insights, and strategy at companies like General Mills, Mintel, Nielsen, and Kantar. And she's integrated retail execution and consumer insights. Diana and I work together at Ipsos, helping brands and retailers better understand people's habits and needs to guide more effective strategic decisions. And now we've both launched our own companies. And Diana has built upon her experience to found PDG Insights based in Evanston, Illinois. And PDG Insights unlocks cost-effective consumer insights to craft retail strategies and brand strategies. Diana, is there anything you would add? Anything I missed?
I think what we really do here is after working with large Fortune 500 companies for years, I launched PDG Insights really with that intent of targeting mid-sized and emerging brands and helping them really understand how to navigate the retail landscape and help bring them to a place where they can understand how to tell data-driven stories to merchants and buyers at retail in a way that allows them to more effectively compete with larger manufacturers in the space. Something that, as you look at these emerging brands, often we over-index at Latino brands, African-American brands, women-owned brands. And for me, this is a way to really target and focus on the communities that to me are incredibly important.
Important and very interesting. And so tell us, how did you come to focus on specific communities? And today we're going to talk on the podcast, and I should say, welcome to the new podcast series, which is Tuned Out, Building Brands and Driving Sales While the Whole World is Screaming. And we're going to focus today on the older adult market specific to Latinos and at that intersection of retail and manufacturing. And how did you come to focus on Latinos?
I think for me, there were a couple of different pieces to it, but I think it really comes down to who I am, right? I am a Latina founder. As I worked within the CPG space, I saw a real gap in the market and how marketers talked about Latinos. Not in that they didn't recognize them, but more in this way in which marketers don't know really how to talk to us authentically. And I think that there are certain kind of tropes and misperceptions that guide marketing strategy and even innovation strategy that leave lots and lots of opportunities on the table. We aren't a monolith. That is something that has been said for decades. But in fact, we are really a mosaic that brings different pieces together. And I think I wanted to find a path to create a cost-effective way for marketers within the industry to talk to us, to learn from us, and then to build strategies for go-to-market based on that new understanding.
Absolutely. What you just said sounds so in sync with the way that Nicole Muncie and I think about older adults, and the same reason we decided to found Morning Light Strategy, because there are so many misperceptions and people do think of older adults as a monolith. And, it's everything you just said applies very directly to older adults as well. Marketers need to better understand them.
Yeah.
So let's think about who older adults are in Latino families. Could you talk about that relationship between parents and grandparents and children and maybe extended family? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, when you and I kind of first connected on this, I really started to think about it. And the truth is when you look at our industry as a whole, as they think about Latinos, as we talk about Latinos, we talk about how young we are, right? We've got more than 2/3 of US Latinos are under 45. But what is fascinating is when you really look at Latinos and you separate kind of the foundation of where the bulk of our population is, there is a fair amount of Latinos that are fall into that older adult place. And what's more important, and is actually something that I think is very much not common knowledge, is U.S. Latinos have the second highest life expectancy rate versus any other ethnic groups in the U.S. population. So actually, there's a lot of work that has been done in this space, and based on a study by the Public Health Policy Organization KFF, using National Center for Health Statistics data, what we find today is that US Latinos have an average life expectancy of 77.7 years versus an overall average of 76.1 years. We are living a year and a half longer than the average American. And we are living just over a year longer than non-Hispanic whites in the US. And it's funny because this is something that was coined the Hispanic paradox over 40 years ago, because we do have longstanding health conditions. We generally are in lower socioeconomic brackets with less access to healthcare, and yet we are still living longer. And that has continued to be the case for over 40 years. And people don't really know why, but one of the major hypotheses in the medical community is actually the strength of the familial and community support given to older adults in the Latino community. Part of that is driven by the prevalence of multi-generational homes, where older adults are just an embedded part of the home. Part of it is driven by that larger kind of community-based family that exists in the Latino population that doesn't necessarily exist everywhere else.
Mm-hmm. And that's so interesting, because we know that social isolation and loneliness has a direct impact. It's directly linked to a mortality rate, a higher mortality rate. So that's fascinating to see how that plays out with a population that has a real cultural lean toward community and supporting and having that family networks.
Well, and I think it's interesting because one of the things, as you look at social isolation, I think one of the elements is within the Latino population, there are aspects that are as you look at faith-based communities, as you look at kind of broader networks within this space, a lot of the programs that tie to older populations are actually socializing older adults. So things like, it sounds really silly, but you go to any church, regardless of faith, in the Pilsen neighborhood in Chicago, you will find loteria nights, so bingo nights, but it's Mexican bingo, that really are targeting older adults as a way to keep people going. There are, it sounds again silly, regardless of faith, prayer groups that just become a part of what people do as a way to socialize. And it's weird because as you talk about faith and you talk about grocery retailing, you don't always connect the dots, but inherent in this Latino population, and oftentimes where faith plays a heavier hand, you see that even the church-based communities serve as an extension that allows older adults to be able to socialize with other adults that are in similar settings. And it allows people to break apart, and it's innate in the community.
Yeah. I do want to ask you about caregiving, but first, to build on what you're talking about, I'd like to flip that around actually and talk about the older adult and their role within the community in terms of leadership and influence overall. I think, where I was headed with my thought and my question there was around what kind of support are they given? But actually, can you talk to us about what kind of support they are giving?
I think one of the biggest things that you will see, and I don't have research. This is one of those places where I struggle because I don't have data.
Okay.
But I have I have what I see from a social and cultural kind of perspective in my own life and in volunteer settings that I do. You have older adults as very active volunteers. And I think one of the things is as you look within, so again, I'm thinking about Pilsen and Little Village in Chicago. I mean, when you sit and you go to or organizations focused on the youth that are struggling with different things, you actually have and ironically, when they're within your family, they're abuela or abuelo or tia or tío, which is aunt and uncle, grandmother, grandfather, right? But when you go in a larger level, this idea of padrinos and madrinos, which are actually external people who are supporting younger members in the family, are something that's kind of it's one of those things that while it's culturally known, it's not culturally talked about. But there is this assumption that people who have succeeded within the community come back and then continue to support the community, and that goes through generations. And it's one of those things where even as you look at consumer activism, one of the things happening right now, and again, it shows more this idea of the role of the elders within the community. Um, there's a lot of consumer activism happening right now within the grocery space, staying completely apolitical. But there is a movement called the Latino Freeze movement that really is it's exploring some of the broader policies around DEI and retail. The only reason I bring this up is it is a consumer activism program that ties to boycotting certain brands and certain retailers for pushing back against DEI. But the person who's at the forefront of it, there are three people. It is Dolores Huerta, who is actually part of the California farm workers movement back in the 60s. She is 95 years old and still serving as a leader of a national consumer advocacy movement in the same way that she did in the 60s.
Wow.
It is John Leguizamo, the actor. Dolores Huerta is Mexican American. John Leguizamo is Puerto Rican. And then there is actually completely unrelated a medical doctor out of California who somehow connected with these two to launch a national movement. It is, and it's all this idea of you have someone who is in their 40s. John Leguizamo, I think, is late 50s, and then a 96-year-old woman who marched in the civil rights movement, leading in consumer advocacy program. And I think that kind of tells this idea of no one is ever too old to lead within the community.
Oh, I love that. That's a fantastic example. But let's talk a little bit about caregiving, because I am still interested in. My understanding is there is no word in Spanish for caregiving. It's something that's just very natural, and it's not a separate role. It's just part of being a family. So, can you talk about what that looks like and how that plays out?
And this is the thing. It really is. So much of this is more. It's just organic, right? A lot of times, Latino families live in multi-generational homes because they have to, right? Because financially, it is one of the easiest things to do. Or as you look at older family members, because potentially financially, they do not have a retirement account. They do not have savings that can help support them. And so everyone lives together. And what's interesting is within these families, there are elements of caregiving across the board, right? If you have older family members in the home, they may actually be watching the kids and serving as childcare while parents are out working, right? But then the parents that are out working are helping support the older adults and the children. It is this ecosystem that really is more circular, where everybody is caregiving in the same way. But, and as you kind of tap into some of these things that kind of impact older adults, right? When you have older adults that are kind of living separately in different states and different things, like as potentially health issues increase, as certain things kind of decline, you get into this circumstance in which ultimately have to you ultimately have to you watch and observe things change versus being surprised by things changing, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Okay. And so as people are caring for one another as an ecosystem within the family, how does that impact shopping and product choice? You know, that moment at the store where you choose something, are they choosing for one another, and how is that communicated?
Yeah, I think it really tends to be whoever is in the store is the one making the choice.
Yeah.
And if an older adult has a brand that they care about, it's very likely that the person shopping knows that, because
Okay.
that's actually a very common conversation. I like this, I want that. This is a part of what I'm looking for. Right. But at the end of the day, it's who is ever doing the shopping that generally makes the call. And that actually might be driven by brand, but it also is just as likely to be driven by price. What is on sale right now? What is going to work in this moment? And what's
Mhm.
interesting in this broader ecosystem of shopping is in multi-generational homes, it also might not just be one child, right? There might be two children that are adult age children with their children and some parents. And so it could actually be either child that's dropping in the grocery store, or it could be an adult child outside of the home that's dropping in to help with the shopping and will drop stuff off. And so what's interesting with grocery shopping with Latino families is it really isn't kind of this clear cut shopping mission and trip. It really becomes more of a broader ecosystem of shopping where other people outside of the home may actually be bringing stuff in as well.
Okay. Would you say, I mean, I think about my own household, we've got very clear rituals as far as grocery shopping, who does what, who goes where, and that kind of thing. Are you saying that that would be different typically, where there's not one person who would regularly do those grocery trips?
I think it can be, and I think it really kind of depends on the circumstances from a perspective of convenience. And I think part of it is right with a lot of these multi-generational homes. Again, it's driven by economics, and so if you have one parent who's working two jobs, you may need the other parent to pick up the slack, or they may have a sibling that they call that said, "I didn't have time to do this. Can you make sure that we have this in the house?" And so it really isn't as structured. It's not necessarily built off that weekly shopping trip for stock up. It's more sometimes quick trip based, or depending on the time of the month, because that's the other piece, right? As you look at kind of certain families, particularly lower income families, there's an element of kind of buying in bulk at the beginning of the year or at the beginning of the month when they have more access to money, but then going lighter at the end of the month and just doing quick stock ups and on only what is needed at the end of the month.
Okay. Okay. How about gender? So we've talked about age, but I'm curious as to your perspective on gender in the shopping and the choice, product choice.
Yeah. I think gender is interesting because I think, and I will say this, right? I think we know that historically there's kind of been a male driven kind of expectation within the Latino population about this is a woman's role and this is the man's role. And I think as more and more Latino families have moved to two people working outside of the house,
Mm.
that has started to decline. It doesn't mean that there aren't undercurrents, but I think there is more, particularly for and I say this as a Gen Xer or an almost millennial, but technically a Gen Xer. Um, you know, I have broken down those stereotypes. My friends, my cousins, my like it is starting to that it's being pushed out in a way in which the expectation is we do need help. We can't do it all. And we can't work too. And so the men have started to kind of come in and learn how to be actively involved in a lot of ways. It's not perfect, but it is changing.
Okay. Yeah, that is really interesting. Um, so are there products or brands? I mean, I know this is a very broad question, but products or brands that work well across generations, or maybe items the whole family uses, or would you say that there is some generational um, strong opinions about the way things should work in terms of a product. I would use this for this, or you would buy this brand in this category.
I think there is definitely some elements of that, particularly as you look at the older generation. So I think about my abuela, my grandmother, who passed away about 10 years ago at 97, and her mother in law, who passed away at 104.
Wow.
And there was a certain flour and a certain lard that you could only buy one brand. And it was White Swan for flour. And honestly, I can't remember the brand of lard. It came in these giant, like, paint tubs. And like, she'd just take the scoop and put it in the flour to make the tortillas. But like, they were dead set on it has got to be this, 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 and this.
Uh-huh.
And that has, again, and I think some of this is just in how fast paced at a larger level our families are. And this is consistent with other US populations, right? Time and money have become kind of a driving force in where you shop. So if you can't get, and I grew up in South Texas, right? If you can't get to the HEB and you have to shop at Walmart and Walmart doesn't have the right brand, you adapt and then you might keep going or vice versa. And so I think as you look at my aunts and their generation, they were the ones that started to say, it's okay to change. It's okay to switch. And that has been kind of then passed down through the generations as you look at my cousins and myself.
Okay. You went immediately to cooking, baking, so food items. Was that, would you say that's a fair, that there might be more brand preference or maybe usage preferences within
I think
food?
usage, I think it's about occasion and I think it's about products, right? And I think some of it is also just where and what it is for, right? Like there are other brands. I mean, I remember I grew up and all my grandmother used for skincare was Ivory soap
Okay. Yeah.
and bar soap, right? There
Sure.
was no
Yeah.
creams. It was Ivory bar soap for your skin and it would keep your skin fresh and beautiful, right? And it's one of those things where ironically, Dove kind of got introduced at one point, and I, to this day, and I've never really thought about it, I still default to using Dove in a lot of instances because it's just kind of been there and it does work well enough, right? So I think there are other departments and other categories where brand matters, but it's more about comfort and familiarity and less about necessary the need for brand preference.
Okay. Okay. So how about product features? I know when, back when you and I used to work together, I would work on a lot of food categories.
Yeah.
And I know that there was often an assumption about flavor choices and things like that. So as you think about certain features, are there product features? It could be familiarity, it could be safety, it could be ease of use, or it might be flavors I might put in with a familiarity kind of bucket. What would you say is driving choice?
I think at the end of the day, it's familiarity.
Yeah.
And I think it is one of those things that what's interesting is as Latino cuisine, regardless of country of origin, has become more popular, you have seen brands, honestly, both in food and non-food, embrace them and tie to them in different ways, right? And so what's interesting is you see some of it done in more just kind of this like mass appeal perspective. I mean, how many habanero or, Chipotle things can you find in the country today? But others of it are done in a more intentional and authentic way. And it's funny because HEB is one of these retailers that I tend to lean into, but part of it is because they are not technically a Latino grocer. They're a large regional player that is honestly one of the most successful and largest grocers in the country. And yet, because they have by choice stayed exclusively in Texas in the US, they have created this ecosystem within their retail environments that is completely authentically and credibly Latino without really doing anything but just be who they are. And part of why I mention them is because in the last few years, they've launched a private brands offer, an entire branded private brand called Mi Tienda that is actually food and non-food products, but tapping into the ingredients and the flavors of Mexico.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and it's fascinating because it's one of those things where there are elements that like general populations have heard of, but there are also kind of elements and ingredients that most people might not have heard of that really are catering to Mexicans, not just Latinos, but Mexicans within that Texas ecosystem.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Um, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned price plays a role in choice, which it does for everyone, of course. If somebody is shopping for the whole family and they're making decisions on a product that they're not going to use personally, would you say that they would does price play a different role? And where I'm going with this question is really if they're giving it to someone else and it's a little bit of a gift item, even if it's not really a gift, it's an everyday, necessity, but they're buying it for someone else. Are they more likely to look for um, features other than just price?
I think it's that question is a little bit more complex, right? Because
Yeah.
as you look at gifting in particular, right? I think price would be less of a role. If you're looking at I'm leaning into this older adult space, right? So let's say that I need to buy personal care items that are for my parents.
Hmm.
Um, but it's something that they use every day and it's something that I wouldn't use. I think they're still going to try to get the best possible thing for a price that they can afford. They may be deal shopping more. They may be
Yeah.
buying in bulk. So they might buy differently for that item while
Hmm.
still trying to ensure that they have the best quality option. And that's the thing is, as you think about it, within the community as a whole, I think there are elements where when you're shopping for somebody else, it's the same rule as when you're shopping for your children, right? Like, I think as you become more familiar with the category, become more familiar with the products. You figure out where are the places where you can spend a little less, and where it is imperative to keep at a branded level, focusing on higher price premium products. If it's meant to be an indulgence, right? If it's meant to make somebody feel good and it's something that's a special treat, I think they will spend more. But again, those daily kind of mandatory staples, there might be a little give in how they shop or where they shop, right? That might be a Costco load up or a Sam's Club load up versus I'm buying it at the local Walmart one off or Target because it's a little more expensive.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. I want to tell you, I talked with Dave McCaughan on this podcast earlier, and he has a story. So he spent a lot of time in Asia, and he has a story about Listerine. He was at McCann, an ad agency, and
Okay.
they were trying to. So Listerine already had they were the market leader,
Yeah.
but they wanted to boost share a little bit.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what they found is in Japan, it was the daughter or daughter-in-law who would do the shopping. And there also was just a cultural norm of picking up a product and reading the backpack. So
Yeah.
they knew that information on the backpack would be communicated. And they put something on there, which I'm going to paraphrase right now, but it was about the benefit of using Listerine for those over a certain age. I think it was 65, to help avoid periodontal disease and to be able to eat what you want. And so the message was fundamentally, it was about oral health, but really, ultimately, it was about the freedom to eat what you want to and to maintain your tooth and gum health.
Yeah.
And what's your reaction to that as you think about the Hispanic market?
I think that the more that you can communicate the benefits, right?
Mhm.
The better. I think that the packaging as a whole definitely does serve as a source of information, as do kind of some of the normal ads. I think um I think there is a missed opportunity in being able to communicate things that are specific to certain audiences within the population, that I think actually does exist at a broader level across. Because you would think about older adults, right? There are different needs. I think we as a country do a really good job focusing on younger consumers and how things work. And I think we miss that opportunity for older adults. And I think it could change how people buy or create new use cases for people buying.
Absolutely. I could not agree more with you. That's a big part of why we founded Morning Light Strategy, because that is a white space opportunity, whether it's for innovation or just for, a focused sales growth.
Yeah.
I mean, in Japan, they decided to focus on the older adult because they knew they tended to use less Listerine, and it was successful. They did end up boosting share. So yeah, absolutely agree. How about cultural relevance or even Spanish language packaging in building trust with older Latino shoppers or their caregivers?
You get a sigh, and this is one where I really struggle, right? I think that the general assumption, and so I'm hoping that this isn't, I think that the default for US marketers is we're just going to throw some Spanish on it. That works. And I think what people forget and or don't understand is that 80% of us are completely comfortable in English.
Yeah.
And when you're throwing in Spanish, or you're adding that bilingual signage, it's really targeting a certain population, which is actually a minority of US Latinos.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, it doesn't mean it's not important, but it's more about understanding nuances and why you might want to put something in Spanish. If you have a product that tends to over index among immigrant Latinos in the US, that Spanish language piece is going to be critical. It's going to be critical on products. It's going to be critical on signage in stores, on advertising to Latino consumers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking at the Latino population and you're targeting middle income or higher income Latinos that are younger, we're a lot more likely to speak English than we are to speak Spanish. And you're going to have to appeal to us in slightly different ways because candidly, sometimes just that default to Spanish feels inauthentic. And a lot of times, all people do is take the wording that they use in English and switch it to Spanish. And it doesn't always translate the same way. But also, it's kind of what you tend to see is just, you tend to see them change the language and put a Latino actor or actress or influencer on it, and that's it. And it really is this idea. There's not been any thought put behind this. You just want to make it easy for us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that connects with what we know also about Gen Z. There are a lot of brands out there, and I'm talking mass market, who go after Gen Z with things that they think are just going to push the buttons. And when it feels inauthentic, then that's rejected. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask about channel preferences and retail environments.
Yeah.
So this is around shopping in store versus online.
Yeah.
And would you say that varies by age? Does it vary by type of product? Is there any kind of broad rules of thumb that you could share?
I think one of the things that we see with the Latino population from a channel perspective is we definitely shop. We are a little stronger in the club channel. We are definitely over indexing at retailers like Walmart or HEB or Publix, and that's kind of geography driven. But we also, one of the interesting things in some research that we've just done is we definitely favor, if we don't actually have like independent Latino retailers, we favor natural and organic channels. And it's because those things that actually make authentic independent grocers targeting Latino consumers different are what you see in the natural organic channel. A heavy focus on produce, fresh meats, prepared meats. The flavors themselves tending to be more natural, which a lot of what you see in certain countries leans into as well. And
Mhm.
so it's part of why you actually see a retailer like Sprouts do so well with the Latino population. Not only are they often in markets that are heavily Latino, but the value, the proposition of who they are leans into things that Latinos value.
Totally makes sense. Yes, absolutely. Um, and then just a couple last questions around
Yeah.
marketing and messaging. So, when it comes to advertising, are there, again, this is a very, very broad question. I'm sure it varies by category, but are there types of messages that really resonate with Latino families? And then, especially those who have older adults in mind?
I think what you've got to remember about the Latino family is what we've just talked about. Everything centers around the family. And so ultimately, when you're talking to us, talk about family events, talk about family celebrations. And
Okay.
what's interesting is talk about how it supports everyone in the family. It's like thinking about skincare, right? Why is my product going to work for the grandma and the daughter and the mom and the kid, right? Like, and kind of, and then I'm doing that for, but we tend to celebrate holidays as a family at a much larger level. Mother's Day, Father's Day, it's more than a month, right? We are more than a month. And actually, with retailers and brands lean into the fact that we're more likely to come together as a family for New Year's Eve or for the Super Bowl or for Dia de los Muertos, which a lot of people know about, right? You're going to have opportunities there. Tapping into that creates an opportunity for everybody.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. Well, why don't we leave it there? I think that's a wonderful place. We talked about the importance of family starting out, and we've wrapped up with that. So just really that focus on family and everyone, an ecosystem of care,
Yeah.
which is beautiful. It's really a beautiful thought. So, Diana, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And again, Diana with PDG Insights, and I'm Dana with Morning Light Strategy. And it has been wonderful to talk to you today.
Great talking to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.